Mist crept over the wires like spectral fingers, enveloping the mountains and frozen fields that held the secrets of Viggo's clan. The wind howled through the tents and huts, carrying the smell of burning wood and sea air, while the crackling of flames echoed in the heart of the village. In the great square, warriors gathered together, whispering to each other, their expressions marked by doubt and defiance. The old Jarl was dead, and in his place was left only a young man, his son, Viggo, a warrior of blood but without enough scars to be called a leader. His father's blade, an ancient sword scarred by past battles, now rested in his hands. But the weight he felt came not only from the metal, but from the suspicious looks around him. To many, he was just a boy trying to step into the boots of a giant. To others, he was a threat to the survival of the clan. The ancients whispered of times past, of times when a leader needed to be forged by iron and not by bloodline alone. There were those who supported him, but there were those who would rather see another Jarl take his place. The clan was fractured, and the cold of winter was nothing compared to the chill of distrust that hung over him. Yet Viggo knew he could not hesitate. The world of strong men did not forgive his weaknesses. Among the whispers were voices plotting against him, veiled alliances and enemies who wielded not just blades but words as sharp as daggers. And beyond the town walls, the real danger loomed, other clans hungry for land, pirates stalking the coast, and a winter that threatened to nip any hope in the bud. If he was to be more than a name in the wind, he would have to prove, with blood, with wit, and with strategy, that he was worthy of the throne of wood and iron he had inherited. Before Viggo, there was Ulfgar, the Iron Wolf. His name was whispered with respect and awe by those who sailed the northern seas. From a young age, Ulfgar demonstrated a fierce instinct for war and leadership, guiding his clan through bitter winters and bloody battles. Under his steady hand, the village prospered, not only through force of arms, but through cunning that earned him alliances and riches. He understood that war was not won by sharp blades alone, but by well-made promises and well-seized opportunities. And so his fame grew, spreading like the roar of a storm. Tales of his victories were told by the fireside, amidst sips of mead and laughter among veteran warriors. It was said that in his youth, he led a raid against a Saxon fort, breaking down its gates with burning logs and taking its riches without losing a single man. On another occasion, he defended the village against an invasion by a rival clan, setting an ambush in the snow-covered hills where his enemies marched blindly to their destruction. But his greatest achievement was the lasting peace he secured for his people, a rare feat among the Vikings, who were often trapped in endless cycles of war. However, not even the gods are immortal, and the shadow of death found Ulfgar in his old age. It was not in battle that he fell, but in the grip of a treacherous fever that not even the healers could contain. Even in his final moments, his voice remained firm, commanding his son to inherit his position. But no legacy comes without challenges. If in life Ulfgar had held the clan together, his death had opened cracks that could turn into uncontrollable fissures. And now, it was up to Viggo not only to carry on his father's name, but to prove it to those who thought him unworthy of the wolf's inheritance. Viggo was a young man of 23 winters, the son of Ulfgar the Iron Wolf and Lydia, a noblewoman whose life was taken too soon. From the moment he cried, he carried the weight of destiny on his shoulders. Growing up as the son of a great leader brought privileges, but it also imposed relentless challenges. As a child, while other boys ran carefree through the fields, Viggo spent hours at his father's side, observing war meetings and listening to the strategies that kept the clan safe. He was curious, attentive, always absorbing every word as if they were sacred runes etched in stone. But to the clan elders, this meant nothing. To them, he was nothing more than a boy with ambitious eyes, protected by his father's shadow. At a young age, Viggo began to show that he was not only an heir by blood, but by spirit. At the age of 13, he organized a small group of young warriors to protect the crops from wolf attacks during the winter. It was a simple plan, but effective. Under his leadership, no one was killed, and supplies remained intact. At 16, on a raid against a Saxon village, while his father and the others were distracted by looting, Viggo saw the danger before anyone else. Enemy reinforcements were approaching. He quickly assembled a group, set fire to the village's grain stores, and, with the smoke and chaos, ensured that his people fled in time. Despite the victory, his elders attributed his success to luck rather than talent. He was too young, they said, still a boy. But Viggo's youth did not prevent him from earning respect among the warriors of his generation. He trained tirelessly, seeking to improve not only his strength but his intelligence. He observed the squires, the builders, the healers. He wanted to understand everything that made a clan thrive, not just wielding a sword. When he spoke, his words carried weight, for they came not from empty bravado but from sharp reasoning. Yet no matter how much he proved his worth, the elders remained skeptical. Ulfgar's blood ran in their veins, but they saw only a boy playing warrior. To them, a young wolf was no threat while the old one still had teeth. But time waits for no man, and Viggo knew his moment would come. He just had to be ready when it did. Ulfgar's death was a brutal blow to the clan, and most of all to Viggo. The Iron Wolf, the indomitable warrior who had led his people through so many battles, now lay lifeless. His death came not in the glory of a battlefield, but in circumstances that still stirred whispers among the warriors. Some said the gods had called him before his time. Others believed that enemy forces had plotted in the shadows. What was certain was that, at dawn on that fateful day, Ulfgar did not rise. Found in his tent, lying on his bearskin, staring blankly at the wooden ceiling, his breathing had ceased. No visible wounds, no signs of struggle, only the silence of death, leaving a void in the heart of the clan. The council of elders convened in haste, and uncertainty gripped the village. Who would take the Iron Wolf's throne? Viggo felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had known this day would come, but never too soon. At 23 winters, he possessed sharp combat skills and a strategic mind inherited from his father. Yet being Ulfgar's son was not enough. To the older warriors, a leader needed to be forged by time, proven by experience, not just by bloodline. Many saw him as a boy, not a warlord. The voices of the clan echoed in heated debate. Some, especially the young warriors who had grown up alongside him, supported him and pledged their loyalty. But others murmured that the clan needed a mature leader, someone with deeper scars, someone who did not have only his father's shadow as a shield. Viggo watched these doubtful looks and felt the pain of his own hesitation. Could he really do it? His greatest fear was not combat or external enemies, but failing his people and dishonouring his father's name. Among those who supported him from the beginning were Sigurd, Ulfgar's old advisor, and Ragnar, his childhood friend and skilled shield maiden. Sigurd was one of the few elders who believed in the young leader's potential and did everything he could to ensure that Viggo would not be swallowed up by the skepticism of the others. A wolf does not ask permission to lead the pack. He simply leads, he would say. Ragnar, always fearless, would not accept any affront against Viggo without retaliating with sharp words or even with his fists. But even with this support, Viggo knew that words would not be enough. The clan needed actions, unquestionable proof of his leadership. And to do so, he would have to face challenges far beyond the gates of his village. Battles not only against enemy swords, but against the distrust of his own people. The air in the meeting room was heavy. The large, dark hall, with its rough wooden walls, was filled with warriors and elders, all awaiting the decision on who would take over the leadership of the clan after Ulfgar's death. But no one had the courage to make the first move, until the deep, authoritative voice of Haldir, the Nighthawk, cut through the silence like a sharp blade. He was not only one of the most respected elders in the clan, but also an imposing figure, marked by a life of battle and conquest. His nickname was no coincidence. He possessed a keen sense of sight, able to detect weaknesses in others and use them to his advantage. His piercing gaze and hard features gave the impression that nothing could shake him, and his presence seemed to expand throughout the room, causing everyone present to fall silent. The Nighthawk did not just lead, he dominated. With his voice firm, Haldir stood and faced Viggo. Ulfgar's young son wants to lead. But what does he know of the weight of an axe? What does he know of the distant lands we have explored? What does he know of the honor of a true leader? The room fell silent. Nighthawk was a man of few words, but each one carried the force of thunder. He knew that to his elders, Viggo was still nothing more than a boy with good intentions. He, Nighthawk, was a man forged in fire, with more scars than he could count, and many felt that the clan needed a leader who knew what sacrifice truly meant. The village watchman himself, the oldest man in the clan, wilted in his chair at Haldir's proposal. The tension in the air was palpable. Nighthawk looked at Viggo with an enigmatic smile. If you want the position of leader, prove it with honor. One fight, Viggo. If you win, I will support you as leader. If not, you will never be able to carry on the name of Ulfgar. Viggo felt the pressure build in his chest. The murmurs of the warriors around him were barely audible, but he knew they were all watching. He could hear the sound of his own heartbeat, accelerating. Challenging Nighthawk to a fight was risky, even suicidal, considering the experience and strength of the man before him. But something inside him, an ancient fire, urged him not to back down. He could not show weakness. If he backed down now, he would lose all credibility with the clan. I accept the challenge, Viggo said, his voice firm, even if fear lurked between the lines. He knew this was the only chance he had to prove his worth. Nighthawk smiled, as if he already knew the young warrior would surrender to his own doubts. The bet was made, and no one would speak of the future of the clan again without blood being spilled. In the center of the village, preparations for the fight began. The crowd gathered around the central clearing, a large square of flat stones where the Vikings gathered to decide contests of honor. The villagers stood attentively, some with frowns, others with eager eyes, as if this were a show for the gods. Viggo could already hear the echoes of Sigurd's words in his mind, reminding him of the importance of a well-planned fight, of not giving in to impulsiveness. He knew that the Nighthawk had unparalleled experience, and his skill with a sword was legendary. But Viggo was no ordinary man. He also possessed the spirit of the Iron Wolf. He knew that he could not win by force alone. The key would be to use his agility and brains to outwit the master of battle. In the distance, the Nighthawk, impassive, sword in hand, watched his opponent prepare. The sound of the blade being drawn echoed across the makeshift battlefield. The eyes of the village were fixed on those two men, not only because it was a fight between a young man and a veteran, but because the fate of the entire village and the future of the clan depended on this fight. The crowd waited anxiously. The tension in the air was palpable. As the two men prepared themselves, Ulfgar's shadow seemed to be present, as if watching from a distant place. But here, in that moment, there was no more room for the past. Only the present mattered. The sound of the blade sliding through the air and the final preparations were about to be made. The fight was about to begin, and no one knew for sure how it would end. The battlefield was prepared in the center of the village, where the Vikings gathered around a circle formed by men and women, all anxiously awaiting the fight that would determine who would assume the leadership of the clan. The air was tense, charged with palpable expectation. Viggo, still with his nerves on edge from the impetuous decision to accept the challenge, was tense and his mind focused. He held his sword firmly, feeling the weight of its blade, but also the weight of the responsibility he felt on his shoulders. Everyone looked at him, the young man who sought to prove his worth, while the Nighthawk, imposing as a storm, looked at him with an enigmatic smile on his lips. The Nighthawk was a mountain of strength and wisdom, his body marked by scars from countless battles won. He had a calm and impassive posture, an absolute confidence that only true veterans of the battlefield possessed. He didn't seem to fear the young man in front of him, who was still trying to understand the true meaning of power. The Falcon, in a deep, gravelly voice, spoke, "Get ready, boy. Experience is not learned overnight." With a shrill cry, Viggo advanced, his sword cutting through the air with a swift movement, trying to hit the Falcon's side. But the veteran only stepped aside with a nimble step, dodging easily and letting the young man lose his balance. Viggo, determined, tried again and again, but the difference in skill was monstrous. Each of Viggo's blows was stronger than the last, but each one was defended with the calmness of someone who had already faced many battles and knew exactly how to move his body. The Night Falcon did not attack, but limited himself to dodging and blocking with almost supernatural precision. He smiled, almost as if he were amused by the boy's youthful energy, his boldness and impetuosity. As Viggo raged, desperately trying to strike his opponent, the Nighthawk disarmed him with a single movement. Viggo's sword flew from his hand, falling far away, and the stunned young man tried to regain his composure, but to no avail. The Nighthawk knocked him to the ground with a blow of his hand, causing Viggo to fall heavily, the impact reverberating through his body, and the crowd around him murmured in surprise. The one who had once seemed like the future leader was now humiliated before everyone. And to complete the final blow, the Nighthawk calmly approached, picked up his sword and, with the blade, struck the ground next to Viggo, creating a crack in the earth. The sound of steel striking the ground resounded, echoing throughout the hall, and the hawk's words cut through the air like thunder. "Viggo, son of Ulfgar, you do not have what it takes to be a leader. Now, my first order, as the new head of this clan, is your exile. Leave and never set foot here again. This is no longer your place." The word exile was like a death sentence to Viggo, but he had no time to react, nor to reflect. A deathly silence took over the village, and he knew, at that moment, that his entire journey here had been in vain. His own mistakes would lead him to solitude. The crowd looked at the young man, who, in a mixture of pain and shame, slowly stood up, without looking at those watching him. The Nighthawk, with an implacable gaze, followed him, his mind already focused on the next steps in his governance. And so, as Viggo disappeared over the horizon, the story of the young heir's exile was only just beginning. The Nighthawk would take his place, but would he truly be able to rule with wisdom and balance, or would the weight of his arrogance and past achievements make him fall into the same abyss that Viggo had nearly reached? Only time would tell. After the public humiliation and merciless blow of his exile, Viggo was cast into the unforgiving cold of the forest, far from what he had ever known. For 3 long winters, he fought to survive. The young man who had once been hailed as the heir to the Iron Wolf now depended solely on his strength, wits, and skill to stay alive. With each dawn, the challenge was the same: hunt or be hunted. On his solitary journey, Viggo not only honed his combat skills, but also became a master of strategy. For days, he would trek through dense forests, climb icy mountains, and hide in caves, molding himself into more than a potential leader. He would become a ruthless warrior. As Viggo spent the 3 years trying to regain control of his life, the village he had once called home, where his father had ruled with wisdom and justice, now lived under the dark rule of the Nighthawk. What had once been a thriving and respectful community was now a haven of fear and oppression. The Falcon, now on the throne, ruled with an iron fist and eagle eyes. His orders were simple. Anyone who dared question his authority would pay with their lives. Any trace of opposition was brutally silenced. The surrounding lands were pillaged, and Vikings from other clans were forced to submit to his tyranny. Under his rule, the peace the villagers had known was replaced by an era of terror and submission. He ordered the weaker villages to be attacked, and their riches plundered to feed his endless greed. Meanwhile, Viggo, in his solitude, became a legend in the wilds. He was no longer the son of the great leader Ulfgar, but the wanderer, the man who had survived humiliation and now forged his own destiny. He hunted dire wolves and forest monsters, defying nature itself. His body, already sculpted by the cold and steel of battle, grew stronger and stronger. But not only his body, his mind also became sharp, calculating. He studied the enemies he had faced, analyzed the Falcon's strategy, and imagined how he could win back what had been taken from him. With no clan to protect, no lands to rule, his only loyalty was to himself. As the Nighthawk reveled in his tyranny, the shadow of the exile grew longer. The Falcon believed his leadership was unbeatable, but he did not know that the true threat was brewing in the icy mountains. Viggo would not be just a leader seeking revenge, but the man who would restore the honor that had been stolen from him. Over the years, he would become more than a warrior. He would become a force to be reckoned with. The young man who had once been scorned would be the only one capable of restoring justice to his land. The destiny that had once humbled him now guided him to something greater. What Viggo didn't know, however, was that the seeds of hatred were being planted in the lands he called home. After years of exile, Viggo, now 26 winters old, was ready to reclaim his rightful place. His plan was meticulous, forged in the pain of defeat and the strength of the scars acquired over years of lonely fighting. When he decided he was ready to return to his homeland, he knew that his return would not be just a simple trip home, but a historic turning point that would rewrite the history of the clan. The first step was to gather resources and allies, and during his time in exile, Viggo honed his skills in both combat and leadership. No longer the reckless youth, he had become a strategist. In search of new allies, he traveled to distant villages, forging new friendships with nomadic warriors, learning new fighting techniques, and acquiring better weapons and armor. During this time, Viggo also built an army of a few but loyal men who believed in his cause, the cause of justice and the recovery of the clan. Over time, his long beard and shaved sides gave him an even more fearsome appearance. The scars on his face and body were proof of a life of struggle and survival, and each mark on his skin told a story of overcoming. After weeks of intense preparation, he felt he was ready to face the Nighthawk and reclaim leadership of his people. His mind was focused, but his soul, marked by pain and pride in his lineage, would not allow him to hesitate. He set off towards his homeland, guided by his desire for justice, and his allies followed him fervently, for they knew that this would be an epic confrontation. When Viggo arrived at the village, the land that was once his, nothing seemed to have changed. The wind still blew with the same force, but now it seemed to carry with it the weight of fear and tyranny. Upon entering, he was greeted with suspicious looks from some of the former residents, now under the rule of Halder, the Nighthawk. The village, once prosperous, was now marked by brutality and lack of freedom. The buildings were dilapidated and the streets were deserted. The atmosphere was oppressive. Viggo, with a firm step, advanced towards the center of the village, where he knew Helda would be. The wind that ruffled his clothes seemed to announce his arrival, as if fate itself had prepared for this moment. "Nighthawk!" Viggo shouted in an imposing voice, his gaze fixed and defiant. His presence was strong, like thunder about to burst. The sound of his voice echoed through the central hall, and even those most loyal to Helda trembled at the sound of Viggo's name. Helda, who was inside his tent, looked out and saw the man he had once humiliated as a boy. Now Viggo stood before him, a strong warrior, full of scars and with a look that conveyed pure determination. Helda laughed, a mocking laugh that reverberated between the walls of the village. He had never believed that Viggo would be able to return, much less challenge him. To him, the young exile was nothing more than a memory of the past. "Ah, Ulfgar's little son, I see you've finally grown up. But you have no business here, Viggo. Go away before I have to pull you out like a weed." Helda sneered disdainfully. Wasting no time with words, Viggo looked Helda straight in the eye and with a quick gesture, summoned his two most trusted warriors. They stepped forward, not to question, but to carry out Helda's order. However, Viggo, now with impressive speed and inhuman fighting strength, drew his sword with a precise movement. In a single stroke, without hesitation, he cut both men in half, their swords falling lifeless to the ground. The silence that followed was heavy, as if the air itself had frozen. Helda, furious, wasted no time in drawing his own sword, and the look of contempt on his face turned into uncontrollable rage. He advanced towards Viggo, fury in his eyes and a desire to crush the man who had dared to challenge his rule. The battle between the two was intense, the sound of clashing swords reverberating throughout the village. Helda, with his experience and strength, was imbued with a fury that only a humiliated tyrant could feel. His blows were powerful, but Viggo, now much more agile and cunning, was able to dodge them with surprising skill. Viggo's every move was calculated, as if he were dancing to the rhythm of the battle, while Helda was a tornado of uncontrolled violence. The Nighthawk tried to crush Viggo with a fatal blow, but the young man, with the cunning he had acquired during his years of exile, dodged and counterattacked, with a deep cut that made Helda falter. Both were injured, but Viggo's resistance was unquestionable. The confrontation lasted long enough for the villagers, who had previously been frightened and subdued, to now begin to feel renewed hope. Finally, after an exchange of immense blows, Viggo found the opening. With a well-aimed blow, he hit Helda's weak point, knocking him to the ground. Helda tried to get up, but the pain was unbearable, and he knew the fight was lost. With his sword broken and shame written all over his face, the Nighthawk had to admit defeat. Viggo, now with the firm gaze of a true leader, raised his sword above his head and, with a decisive blow, ended the tyrant's life. Viggo's victory was a milestone, not only for his physical strength, but for his resilience, for having been able to combine his skills and his wisdom to defeat the one who represented oppression. After Helda's death, the people of the village, who had previously lived in darkness and fear, rose up in support of Viggo. He had not only defeated the tyrant, but also restored the dignity of the clan. The return of the Iron Wolf, now stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever, brought new life to the land that had once been marked by tyranny. Over the next 2 years, under his leadership, the clan prospered. Trade flourished, victories in battle were many, and the spirit of unity that Viggo brought transformed the village into one of the most powerful in the region. Not only as a warrior leader, but as a leader who knew how to listen to his people, uniting them under a banner of justice and freedom. The name of Viggo, son of Ulfgar, was etched in the runes of history, and his legacy, which began with a humiliating defeat, would now be remembered for generations as an example of resilience, courage, and true leadership. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues.